Hello, my name is Hyo Yoon Kang. I'm a lecturer in law at the Kent Law School. My area of specialization is in intellectual property, in particular patent law. My talk today is going to be about my research, my current research, work in progress. I just want to give you an insight about the particular take we have at the Kent Law School on the study of intellectual property. Me and my colleague, we study intellectual property law not just in terms of its legal doctrines, but we also question how it is theoretically underpinned. We question the very concepts themselves. We also study the way in which they are socially embedded, the cultural influences which have an influence on intellectual property law, as well as the industrial practices which are very tightly linked to the legal practice itself. My research at the moment is concerned with the meaning and value of patents in today's so-called knowledge economy. If immaterial knowledge is indeed what drives or increasingly drives economic value, I believe that it is precisely intellectual property law which forms the link between science and technology and other modes of knowledge production and the market itself. So law is acting as an intermediary. But not only does law act as an intermediary, it also creates the market itself. It is actively involved in making of a product and in creating the market. So I'm interested in how exactly this process occurs. How are patents valued? What are patents' strategic, economic, and financial values? And in light of these different questions, what is the value of patents to overall society? Does it serve the public good, or is it rather detrimental to it? So the main aim of my project is to contribute to a better understanding of the value of patents for public good by critically examining and engaging with different understanding of a patent value. This means I pose the question of value not only from a normative and ethical point of view, but also examine how it comes about through concrete practices of valuation in law, technoscience, and finance. So you might not be familiar with patents, and I'm just going to give you some examples of what patents could look like and what they involve. So one legal definition of a patent is that it's a limited monopoly right which is granted in return for the disclosure of inventive information. So you have this so-called patent bargain where a property right is granted in return for disclosing information to the public, so other people know what you have been working on. There's no duplication of efforts. In theory, that trade secrets would be minimized, and so on. So patents are really property rights. They're not the inventions themselves, but what is interesting is when you look at those patent documents, which show what the invention is about, you get very interesting information about past scientific and technological achievements. So on the right-hand side, you see Thomas Edison's light bulb, which is a very prominent and useful invention. On the left-hand side, you have a slightly different invention. It's a model for a potato peeler, and we cannot claim that the significance of the potato peeler is the same as the light bulb, but nonetheless, it also was granted a patent protection. Here's another example of a very prominent patent granted in 1769, the steam engine by James Watt. A more recent example is the first version of the iPod, or the very early version of an iPod, where you still have this scroll lock by which you could browse through your music library. So these are examples of very prominent inventions which have really changed the way we use and relate to technology. Now I want to go back to the example of the potato peeler, not just because it's a useless invention, but it really asks the question, why is it that patents are held to be so valuable when so many of them turn out to be useless? Useless not just in their scientific value, but also maybe in their economic value. So many patents never see it to the stage of production where they're manufactured and traded and sold. A lot of them just kind of die in this library of past inventions. So I started asking myself why intellectual property has been pushed so strongly as rights by certain interests, and also what makes them valuable, particularly when so many of them turn out to be not so valuable, both in scientific and monetary terms. So the obvious simplistic answer to this question is that intellectual property rights create commodities that can be sold and bought. So it's very similar to real property such as land, which you can buy and sell, you can rent, and so on. I believe, however, that the more complete answer to this question lies in the exact mechanism of intellectual property valorization, i.e. the process of acquiring or gaining value. So my research really studies the concrete processes that define and give rise to a patent's value. It asks the questions such as, what is a patent worth? What drives its value? And how are patents accounted for, both as valuable goods for knowledge economy, but also as financial units. So the traditional understanding of patents was really that patents are a limited monopoly right that gives you a head start in marketing, in creating your product, and then to create a market around it. So here's an example of this Steinway grand piano, where it obtained a patent on its metal frame. And before that, traditionally grand pianos had a wooden frame inside it, which had the disadvantage that the wooden frames would shift. Therefore, the piano needed to be retuned very often. The sound was much softer because you couldn't really increase the tension with a wooden frame. With the production of steel frames, obviously, which was only enabled with Industrial Revolution and and the prevalence of steel, Steinway really had a head start in making its grand pianos one of the most used ones and also the most sought after ones in concert halls and by pianists. So this is the traditional understanding of the value of patents, giving you a market position or leadership. Now, my research questions additional modes in which patent values are created. So first of all, I look at patent value in terms of it enabling a certain kind of credit, or giving credit to scientific and technological work, inventive work. The second mode of patent value I examine is patents as signals of credibility. The third value of patents I examine are patents as speculative financial assets or as securities. So my research really adds and questions the existing economic studies of patents from novel historical, theoretical, and sociological perspectives. So let me give you examples of what I mean by these three different modes of value. So here you see a picture of a modern bioinformatic laboratory. Bioinformatics are scientific practices which actually process biological information as really a computer-driven information system. So what is really interesting about this picture is that it really shows you that modern science is not necessarily conducted in laboratories where scientists are conducting experiments. Actually, modern science, especially biosciences, are driven by computers, by the storage capacity, by the speed of calculation, and so on. And this means that you need a lot of machines. And these machines are very expensive. This means that you have to raise money in order to buy these machines and to have this kind of processing power, what you need for bioinformatic research. So modern science has become very capital intensive. This means that that patents have become very useful in this area in order to guarantee that you can raise money with those patents, that you can have a monopoly around certain inventions, which you can, the price of which you can set yourself as a patent owner. The other way in which patents are linked to scientific credit is that patents are seen as tokens or as currencies of scientific credit itself. So traditionally, journal articles or peer recognitions used to be the currency of scientific credit. But increasingly, patents are almost equal to journal articles. So when you look at scientists' CVs, they don't just list their scientific journal publications, but they also list the patents in which they were involved as inventors, or perhaps they even own the patent right themselves. So that's how science, the scientific mode of production, is linked with patents. The second mode of patent value, which I mentioned, was patents as signals of credibility. Here's a very prevalent example of how patents are used in order to convey that a certain invention or product is credible. So in this advert, in small letters, I'm afraid, it says international patents underneath the cream bottle. It's supposed to give you the impression that there's very good science behind the cream. But there are also many other areas in which patents give a legal stamp of credibility to inventions. So for example, for small startup companies, patents are very important factors for investors and venture capitalists when they decide whether they want to invest money in this company or not. So again, patents act as signals of credibility here. Now lastly, increasingly, patents are not just seen as property rights which show the potential value to investors, but they are understood as tradable securities themselves. So this means that they become carriers of investment interests which can be traded and sold. What this means is that we are witnessing an increasing financialization of intellectual assets. And I believe that this process of financialization goes beyond our current understanding of intellectual property as commodities. So a lot of scholarship has been conducted already which criticizes that knowledge is becoming commodified, but this is actually going one step further. It's not just knowledge is not just becoming commodified, it's actually becoming financialized, and it's becoming a speculative asset. So this present research, which I'm involved in, really addresses precisely how patent law is involved in the financialization of knowledge. And ultimately, these questions aim to show what this really means in our understanding and assumption that knowledge is a public good. What does it mean that patents are becoming increasingly financialized? What does it mean that scientists put patents on their CVs rather than scientific journal articles? Thank you very much for listening.